We have Ben Scafidi in the room. We got Ben Scafidi in the room. Ben, how many times have you been on the EFI podcast with us? Is this only number 2?
This is only number 2.
Only number 2. And I think when we were with Eric Wern the other day, we had said you had been on it already 2 or 3 times, but maybe I was thinking about this one that was coming up. But we're super happy to have you, Ben, again. Today we're going to be talking about rethinking or reexamining K-12 education spending. As everybody should know, this is the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. I'm Corey DeAngelis, the Executive Director at Educational Freedom Institute, co-hosted by Matthew Nielsen. He is the co-founder and president of the board at the Educational Freedom Institute. Today we have with us again, and who will probably be with us on future episodes as well, because we had such a great time last time, is Professor Ben Scafidi from Kennesaw State University at their Education Economics Center. And he's an expert in school finance. He's also on the advisory board at the Educational Freedom Institute. So we have a 3-person EFI party today on the podcast again.
He's also a Friedman Fellow at Ed Choice.
I want to be a Friedman Fellow at Ed Choice. Come on, tell them to invite me, Ben. Maybe we'll make something work. But without further ado, I just want to tell everybody, if you have questions for Ben and comments or anything about, look, we already have comments popping up. Carrie Hunter, hi Ben. She's probably super happy you had mentioned that you're an Ed Choice Friedman Fellow as well. But yeah, let's get into it and let's talk about what we're going to talk about. Matthew, you want to kind of let us know what happened in Arizona lately? And
yeah, so I live in the suburbs of Phoenix, and there was a ballot proposition that went before the voters on November 3rd, on Election Day. And so this ballot proposition the number was 208, but they branded it Invest in Ed. That's a common, here in Arizona anyway, they recycle that one. Invest in Ed. So it's this thing. And a couple of things that are unique that we won't talk much more about through the rest of this podcast, but I think just are unique about this ballot proposition. Arizona is what's called a voter protected state. And what that means is that when you put a ballot proposition out to the voters and they vote on it, that is, that if it passes, is voter protected, meaning the legislature cannot change that proposition once it becomes law. They can't change it unless what the changes that they make further the intent of the law. And so for this one to be adjusted by our state legislature, by our elected representatives, they would have to increase taxes even more, for education spending. So again, we won't talk much more about that through the rest of the podcast, but that should say something about the nature of this law that was passed. So Prop 208, it passed. Props always pass here. I mean, it's common all over the country too. If you say, we want to spend more on education, it's like, well, you hate kids if you vote against this proposition. It's like, that's the no side. That's how they paint you. But we'll learn from Ben. That's
Arizona voted to throw more money at the problem in K-12 education.
About $1 billion.
Okay, and so how much is that on a per pupil basis?
It's like around 800-ish. Yeah, it's a little under $1,000 per kid.
All right, so Ben, take it away. What should we think about this kind of initiative and increasing in spending in Arizona? What else have you seen in Arizona?
Well, thanks to EFI for having me. Matthew and Corey, you're the 2 best interviewers in podcasting, and it's really a treat to be with you. Thank you. First, let's talk about the tax side. So it took the top income tax rate in Arizona from 4.5%, which is very competitive compared to other states, to 8%. So a 3.5 percentage point increase. That is actually very stupid, because people that have money can live in lots of places, especially when they retire. So Arizona, having low income taxes and a great climate and great governance, actually, has attracted lots of retirees for lots of reasons, right? Beautiful state, again, climate, tax policy, etc. Now they're taking one of those reasons away. You like wealthy retirees to come to your state from a fiscal perspective. I worked in state government for 2 Georgia governors. You like retirees to come to your state because that have money, because they pay a lot in taxes and don't use a lot in services. And Arizona's benefited from that for decades. And I worry that increasing the rate is gonna slow the rate of retirees moving there. It might even cause some to move away. And a lot of times in these state ballot initiatives, what they say is, look at our state tax system, it's not progressive. And generally they're not. But when you put the federal tax code with the state tax code together, it's actually a highly progressive tax system in the United States. And then when you put in how the federal government spends money, it's more progressive again. So you can't just look at one slice of the tax system and say it's not progressive. You got to look at the total. The way to do tax progressivity is not at the local level, because people can move across states. And so, for example, in Arizona, if you make over $250,000, the money you make after that will now be taxed at this higher 8% rate. And if you're a married couple, what you make over $500,000 will be taxed at this higher 8% rate. And I know that's a lot of money, right? I'd like to make that much, and I'm sure you would too. But again, those people are mobile, and they're paying higher taxes at the federal level already. So I just think that it's not very smart tax policy from a revenue perspective for the state government, but also from an economic development perspective, because, again, new entrepreneurs, the ones that are there might stay because they've already made their decision. A few might leave, but Arizona's been also a beneficiary of people leaving California, right? And let's move our business to, more business friendly, tax friendly Arizona. That's going to slow, and that could even be reversed. So it's just a bad.
Hey Ben, you're thinking too much about this. Let's just pretend for a second that people won't respond to incentives by changing the tax structure, and they're just going to stay put in Arizona. And in fact, maybe since they love giving people money so much, this might increase the amount of people that move to Arizona, because taxes are a great thing. People like to pay taxes. Don't you think that this is such a great thing that we'll be able to spend more money in Arizona schools and elsewhere by increasing the amount that's getting into the classroom and getting into the schools? And then, won't all of society benefit from that, from increasing per pupil spending? Shouldn't we all be happy about this?
Well, no and no. You asked 2 questions. I'll do the first one first. Yes, some left-wing academic will do a study, and they'll look at existing Arizona residents and existing businesses, and they'll show that there's not that much where people leave. But that's you're looking at one little slice. They're looking over a short period of time. They'll look in the first 2 years, right? But what they're missing is that over time, I joke with my students in class. I say, Confucius said, time makes all things more elastic. And I'll inevitably have a Chinese student come to me and say, did Confucius really say that? And I'll say, I don't know, but it sounds like he could have. But what that means is that over time, people are more able to adjust. Think of like a rubber band. Things can adjust more easily the more time you have. So while people might not leave in year 1, year 2, some will leave over time as they have time to adjust. But second, new residents will be less likely to come in, new businesses less likely to come in. And so you need to do that study over a period of time and look at not only the people that currently live there and the businesses currently there, but look at potential new ones. And again, Arizona's been a tremendous beneficiary of this, as have states like Texas, and to some extent my state of Georgia. Is businesses come here, People come here because we have really good policies, right? But again, Arizona just went the wrong direction. But your second question, the entire country has been spending more and more and more and more money on public education on a per student basis. And if you look at national test scores, they've been flat since the early 1970s. Like if you look at NAEP long-term trend scores for 17-year-olds, they've been flat. So we're spending more and more, and we don't seem to be getting more.
Yeah, I think the most recent data came out from NAEP. What was it? 2019 results for 12th graders was 37% proficient in math or reading, and I think it was similar.
Yeah, and it's like we've seen this movie before, and we keep making the same mistakes. If we could go to the PowerPoint I sent you, the first slide, Arizona since 2009, and this is the National Assessment for Educational Progress, grade 4 and grade 8 reading and math scores. Arizona has made gains relative to the national average. Their fourth grade gains have been tremendous. 7 points is a giant gain in a 10-year period on this sort of test.
So Ben, the left two bars are Arizona gains in reading and math, and the right two bars are gains for
gains. They're all
grade
Arizona gains relative to the national average.
So these are all Arizona
So
versus.
for example, on one of them, the reading and math, the Arizona went up like 9 points, and the national average went up 2 points. On one of them, Arizona went up 10 points. The national average went up 3 points. Let's just look at that difference just to have less lines on the screen.
Got it.
But see, in grade 8 reading, Arizona only went up 1 point relative to the national average. But in grade 8 math, they went up 4 points. Given the tremendous immigration from overseas, the international population moving to Arizona, you would think it would go the other way because English for a lot of these folks isn't their first language, right? So you would think Arizona would be going the opposite direction, but Arizona's made these tremendous gains in the last 10 years, and they should be very proud of that. And I know a lot of people like Matthew that live in Arizona that are big school choice supporters, and they really want these gains to be even higher. And they commiserate, like in a year when the gains weren't that big in Arizona, they're wringing their hands, like we got to do more, you know. But Arizona has a great story to tell. But if you look at the second slide, I'll tell you how they didn't get there. Arizona did not get there by spending more money. What you'll see on this slide is Arizona spends a whole lot less per student on their public schools relative to the national average. You can see in 2009, Arizona is spending about $2,400 less per kid. In 2017, that increased to about $3,500 less per kid in Arizona. And look over time, spending per student fell in Arizona. So at a time when Arizona's NAEP scores, and say this, education experts call NAEP, the National Assessment for Educational Progress, the gold standard of testing. There's evidence that having higher NAEP scores in your state is correlated with higher economic growth later on. Now with state tests that states give in public schools, those tests don't have a lot of predictive power about future economic gains in your state. But the NAEP does. The NAEP is kind of this quasi-governmental, nonprofit type group. It was chartered by the federal government. They have a very distinguished board of folks, and then they work very hard to make their tests have very high standards. And again, people left, right, and center call it the gold standard of testing. And again, these test scores are correlated with how your state's going to fare later on economically. So
how did Arizona get better over time if we didn't put more money into the Arizona school system? And how did the U.S. average remain flat? What's different about Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to underscore that point you just made, Corey, because it's very important. We know for sure it wasn't spending more money. It was not, right? Because the United States spent more money. Arizona didn't, right? On a per student basis. And if I may back up, why did Arizona spending per student go down? I mean, you asked me that question earlier, Corey, before we went on the air. It's really two reasons. And this one you said, it's Arizona has a much higher percentage of students in charter schools now than they used to. And charter schools get less taxpayer funding per student. So you really, if you wanted to look at like traditional public schools, we need to separate out charter schools and look at that. So spending may not have gone down in traditional public schools, but it sure as heck didn't go up.
Yeah, I think charters in Phoenix, for example, get about 20 to 25% less funding per pupil than the traditional public schools, if you count all local, federal, state, non-public as well.
And I know you've written on this before, Corey, in other places. That's a pretty common statistic. 20 to sort of 33% that charter schools get less than traditional public schools on a per student basis. So one reason it went down was more students migrating to charter schools because they think that's their families think that's the best education for them, even though the spending's less. The second reason is Arizona's just had this tremendous growth in students. It's been domestic migration from other states. It's been international migration to Arizona, and people want to live in Arizona, right? People, for whatever reason, people want to. And so it's been sort of hard to keep up on the funding. But you really asked me, why were these tremendous gains in Arizona? And if you go to my third slide, I can think of three real quick, right? And there's, people always say there's an old adage that says this. Well, the reason those old adages stick around is because they're true. And there's an old adage, dance with the one who brung you, right? Who brung you to these high test scores, these test score gains in Arizona? Arizona has been a national leader in private school choice. They've expanded it over time. They've been a national leader in making charter schools available to students. They've been a national leader in inter-district choice. So what happened was, and Matt Ladner's written about this, also a Phoenix area resident, a great guy. I think he works for the Arizona Chamber of Commerce, brilliant guy. Ladner's pointed out, you have these very wealthy suburban public school districts that have well-regarded public schools that lost a lot of students to charter schools and private school choice, because they went out and recruited students from less good public school districts. Hey, come to our schools. And so I think when you put all those together, it's led to a low-cost K-12 education system for Arizona, because charter schools, like you said, Corey, get less funding, but also these private school choice programs get even less funding again per student. So it's a very low cost to the taxpayer, and it's leading to these tremendous gains. And there's lots of reasons for that, right? One is you're getting better matches of students to school programs, right? That maybe the classic traditional public school with the centralized curriculum and the centralized testing, maybe that's not the best fit for every kid. Frankly, I think that's not the best fit for the vast majority of kids. But maybe this charter school has this theme, or this independent private school has this structure or this format or this curriculum, and that's a better fit for an individual child. So that's one reason. The second reason is, once you get a significant amount of school choice, like you have in Arizona, then the incentives on traditional public schools, the incentives on charter schools, the incentive on private schools is to do your doggone best for each individual child so that you don't lose them and lose that funding for that child to go to another school. And so the incentives are amazing. And we have that in every other walk of life, pretty much, in the United States. Like, for example, I was talking to someone I work with at the Education Economics Center, and we got something printed, and the printer did a bad job printing it, and we're never going to use that vendor again, right? They messed up. They weren't willing to make it right. That's it. We're done with you, right? So Same thing with schools, right? If they're not doing a good job, it doesn't matter if a school is doing great for the Nielsen kids or the DeAngelis kids. What I care is that school doing a good job for the Scafidi kids. Are my children benefiting? And maybe not. It'd be a great school.
But Ben, schooling is a public good, don't you know? It's not subject to economic forces and competition could really hurt people if since public schooling is a public good, that benefits all of us. What's your response to that?
Well, I'm an economist, as you two know. They're misusing terms there, right? Yes, I believe the research is clear, and this is controversial, but I think it's right, that when your kids get a better education, I benefit. I think that's true. And I feel strongly on that, actually. But it doesn't mean that that has to be done in a publicly owned and publicly operated facility, right? It just means that when your kids get a better education, I benefit in lots of ways. So what we really should care about is what delivery mechanisms lead to the best educational outcomes for students. And again, just because a provider, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
I just want to underscore what you just said, for students, but for each individual student, which requires a variety of options, right? Because everyone's different.
I mean, St. Catherine's Catholic School might be amazing, right? But it might not be a good fit for that kid or that kid, right? Scottsdale, South High School, again, might be a fantastic school, but not for that child, right? So it's a fit thing, but also the incentive properties are just incredible when parents have options. Think about things that you buy where you have lots of options and how well they treat you. For example, prescription drugs. You can get your prescriptions over the internet. Amazon's entering that business now. You can get them where you shop for groceries. You can get them at the drugstore. You get them at the grocery store across the street. So what do they do to keep my business? They give me free flu shots. Sometimes they pay me $10 to get a flu shot, right? Hey, $10, I'll get 5 flu shots. I'm just kidding. Any physicians listening, I only get but I do think about getting that extra money.
Go to this CVS, that CVS. Go to Walgreens.
I thought I've seen you, Matthew, in different lines with me getting our free flu shot.
You're outing me right now on a live stream, Ben.
So Ben,
sorry. The incentive properties of school choice are unbelievable. I mean, if you care about each individual student, you want that school to do their doggone best to provide the best education for each individual student. Right? I mean, think about it some parents, it's hard for them to imagine school choice, right? Because they're used to the current system, right? But think when you're talking to individual parents who are skeptical about school choice, because what they see is the existing private schools in their area that cater to the super rich, right? Or that cater to only certain religious groups, right? But you got to close your eyes and imagine if you had Arizona-style choice or even more. And Arizona should have way more, frankly. We'll talk about that in a minute if you would. But if you had that, there would be so much entry of new private schools, new entry of charter schools. Public schools would do all different things to try to keep students, right? It would make everybody better. For example, I went to the only Catholic high school for boys in Central Virginia, back in the 80s when I was in high school. And that high school could have been dramatically better. I got a great education there. But if there was a bunch of other Catholic high schools that allowed boys to come, right, that would have forced my high school to be better because they wouldn't want to lose the money, right? So it's not a public or private thing. It's an incentive thing.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of underscores also that it's not all about money, right? When you're looking at these types of school choice options in Phoenix, the charter's getting, 20 to 25% less than the traditional schools. if it was all about money, we wouldn't see, 20% of the public school market being provided by charter schools. Families are voluntarily selecting into schools that have less funding on a per pupil basis. Which
and they're taking and they're taking those scholarships in those private school choice programs, which are even less funding,
like half, like less than half,
even
right?
less,
I mean,
yeah.
it's like 90% of the state amount, which works out to be less than half of the total amount. With the what was it called, the Empowerment Scholarship Program, or is it just an education savings account program? I forgot the name.
Scholarship, Yep.
Arizona, to my knowledge, has 5 scholarship programs.
Well, we have the private school tuition programs and ESAs. So yeah, there are more than that.
Someone had a great comment, Gloria Tucker. So I want to hear your take on this, Ben, but she says Florida needs to mirror Arizona school choice. What are your thoughts on that? I think they're both good states for school choice, but do you prefer one or the other, or do you think they're both doing things right? Or
I think Arizona, Florida, and Indiana are doing phenomenal on school choice compared to every other state in the United States. However, if you look at all rich nations on earth, right? We have less parental choice in K-12 education compared to most other wealthy nations on earth. And so we have a long way to go. I got in trouble once. I was testifying in Arizona 4 or 5 years ago before like some kind of joint House Senate committee. And I made a similar comment. I said, you guys are doing great on choice, but you need to do way more. And they jumped down my throat and said, we're doing a lot of choice. We're a national leader. I said, yes. I prefaced it with that, but I guess I didn't preface with that long enough. but I think Florida should do more. I think Arizona should do more. Indiana and every other state should do more. Absolutely.
yeah, I think Florida is at about 4.5% of their school age population is using a private school choice program. And I think in Arizona, it's like 6 or 7%. And the charter school sector is much larger in Arizona, right? Like 18, 19% of the school age population. But yeah, I mean, everybody should have access to these types of programs. It shouldn't just be 4 to 6%, even in the best case scenario. Nationally, I think it's only 1% of the school age population is using private school choice mechanisms.
EdChoice on their website, edchoice.org, has this EdChoice share variable. They're trying to track this over time. So yeah, that's
I'm going to pull that up. That's what I was thinking about when I was talking about that.
I figured you were
Drew Catt has done this for the past couple of years. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. But they have, they did ask people like, what type of school are you in? And as you can see here, like most people are in district-run public schools. 83% of families in the U.S., but only about half of that proportion actually want to be there. And this is consistent across over time and different surveys on the national basis, which goes to show that there's a disparity between what people want and what they're actually doing. More people are stuck in public schools than would like to be there. So when you hear the teachers union saying, 90% of kids are in public schools, one, that's not true if you classify charters as private, which they regularly do. Randy Weingarten, for example, does this all the time. She calls charter schools private schools, but then she includes them in her total to say 90% of kids are there. But the real pushback I have against Randy Weingarten on that is that, well, of course, there's a lot of people there if you can force them to be there, but if they had a real choice, would it still be 90%? Probably not. But here's the table that is really interesting. You can sort it based on homeschool populations, and North Carolina jumps to the top. About 8% of the school age population is homeschooled in North Carolina. I think this was before the lockdown. And then they have something called EdChoice share, the percent of families who are in private school choice programs. And there you go. Arizona, about 6 to 7% in a private school choice program. Florida, second place at about 5%. And Indiana's up there as well.
I'm glad you pulled that up. Drew Catt is a gem that pulls that together. That's very impressive piece of work. And I think he, like you said, he updates it from time to time too. So.
Yeah, that's good. So real quick before we leave this, because there are some other pieces of 208 that we want to touch on it. Not that Arizona's magical in some way or unique per se. in that they passed this because it happens all over the country. But we're just using this as a case study, right? As an example of what is going on in K-12 funding across the country. So we'll move on to some other aspects of what 208 did and what it will do in the future as it's implemented. But last question, Ben, on this point, at least for me. You've said multiple times here through the conversation so far that money didn't get us to where we are as far as NAEP scores, those big jumps, which is awesome. Money didn't do it, but maybe it will. Who's to say? Shouldn't we at least give it a go?
Yeah, I mean, it's just 14,000 on the U.S. average level. We just haven't gotten there yet, even though we've increased it by 280% since 1960 in in inflation-adjusted terms. Maybe 280% is enough. Maybe we need to do 500%, and then we'll finally make it.
Well, because maybe those sevens, Ben, on the maybe those would have been 14s. Maybe we would have jumped up in fourth grade reading and fourth grade math 14 points if we had more money.
What do you think?
That is theoretically possible, but you kind of got to look at the back of the baseball card. Did you guys see the Moneyball movie or read the book?
That's great. Yeah, it's great.
Book's great.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah, book great, movie's great. There's this great scene in the movie where some of the traditional scouts the baseball scouts that don't play Moneyball, they're talking about this hitter. And they're like, oh, he's got a great stance. He's got a great swing. He's strong. He's got great vision. He's a good hitter. And then Brad Pitt, the Moneyball guy, says, well, if he's a good hitter, why don't he hit good? Right? He was looking at his actual performance. Right? So yes, you can imagine someone saying logically, if you spend more money on public schools per student, you're going to get more of this and more of that. Right. And it'll benefit students and make them do better. But like Corey said a second ago, or you said, Matthew, if you look at the data over decades, the back of the baseball card is actually a book, right? It's decades of evidence. We keep spending more and more and more and more adjusted for inflation per student on public schools. And achievement's been flat. And what no one talks about, there's this great study, I believe it was in the Review of Economics and Statistics by Nobel Prize winner James Heckman and Paul Fontaine. And Heckman is a notorious left-wing economist. He's one of the best economists ever lived. His work is incredible, but he's very left-wing. Like he advised President Obama and elected and what have you. But they showed that from 1970 to 2000, public high school graduation rates were on this long, slow decline for a while, and then they started creeping back up in the 90s. So we were spending more and more and more. The labor market changed in America so that we wanted more highly skilled, highly educated workers, but yet we were getting fewer of them. So public school performance went down at a time we were spending way more money. And I know you guys know about this, and I've written about this. Where'd the money go? A big place it went was to staffing. Right? So I call it the staffing surge. So public schools were throwing more and more bodies of the problem, making class sizes go down, adding more administrators, more support personnel. But then achievement was either flat or going down, depending on how you want to measure it. And so while practically speaking, in theory, right, yes, you could spend more money and maybe get higher test score gains. In practice, that hasn't happened. In some sense, America's already tried what you guys were suggesting. America's already tried what Arizona just passed in Prop 208. So Arizona is moving toward the direction of the United States when the United States should be moving more in the direction of Arizona.
We all agree here. But it's a devil's advocate question. It's not a very good one. It gets used all the time. And it gets overused to the point where it's like, but more money, and
Well, and I saw this on Twitter the other day, and I won't name who it was, but it's Ed Reformer, and she, the person said, some people say that we've increased spending over time by large amounts, even after adjusting for inflation, but in reality, the percent of the GDP spent on education has been about the same, about 3 to 4%. So even though it's increased by large amounts over time in real dollars, it's actually about the same, since the percent of the total GDP being spent on education is about 3 to 4%, about the same over time. So we haven't really increased spending on K-12 education. What's your economist thought on that?
Fair point, right, Ben?
No.
Yeah, we actually haven't spent more, because as a percentage of the total economy, it's been about the same.
Okay.
Since the economy has grown.
So the economy turns down, she's going to argue they should get less. Of course.
Exactly.
Not.
That was my response.
Yeah, it's just silly, right?
So let's say our percent of GDP goes from 3% to 10%, and then our real spending goes down because of a contraction in the economy from 15,000 to 10,000. That person would never say that's a growth in real education expenditures. They would correctly say that we've cut it by $5,000. They're just using whatever they can to try to act like we don't spend more money. I thought
totally unrelated.
That was a new one. I was like, "Are you serious?" Because the economy's growing, we actually aren't spending more money.
I agree. That's silly.
So another thing, Ben. People will say, look, the correlations over time and show that we've spent more and more money on education, but and I know that the outcomes haven't gotten any better on average over time. I agree with you, but there's this new wave of research by very smart economists that when you do it a certain way and you plug in certain things into the equations, they actually find that money does matter. The new research concludes that although the correlations don't look like money matters, it actually does. So what is your response to that new wave of education spending research?
There are a few new studies by, like you said, very good technical economists who find that in this case, we spent more money and student achievement outcomes seem to go up. And there are complex studies, what have you. But then you turn it to the real world and you say, but we've done this, right? I remember one of them, the Jackson et al. Study. It was a working paper that came out. It had some statistic, I don't have it exactly, but it was like, if we spend $3,500 more per student, then achievement gaps between black, white, rich, poor would go away. And I remember I saw that working paper and I was like, ooh, right? We've actually increased spending by more than that. And achievement gaps are stubborn, right? It's very sad, actually. The new research by like Rick Hanushek and Paul Peterson and Danny, et cetera, they're that these achievement gaps did close dramatically 50, 60, 70 years ago, 40 years ago. But since that time, they've been stubborn while spending was going like this. The achievement gap stayed. So that study in particular, the Jackson et al. Study, had this finding that, we spend more money, these achievement gaps close. Well, we did it. We did spend more than that, but they didn't close. So you got to look at the real world. And I think the real world evidence is much more compelling than studies. And Corey, I think, didn't you and Max Eden write on this?
I have a few responses to all this evidence. I mean, there's still a lot of statistically insignificant results from a lot of studies, which goes to show you that just any blanket increase is not the same thing as if you look at a particular type of increase. And what people are usually calling for is just a blanket increase to just spend more money in the public school system. So that's not you can't expect the same results there. But then also Jay Green has written a long response on the new evidence on school spending, and he argues that the regression discontinuities aren't legitimate because they use observations that are far away from the cutoff, which, I mean, this is a little too technical for most of our listeners, but then also my response with Max Eden was similar. On one of these studies, they used an instrumental variable, the state share of the total education expenditures, and use that as an instrument to predict changes in spending over time. But we argue that instrument should be a control variable because it can affect both the changes in spending and then also the outcomes, because it's kind of a proxy for centralization of your school system. And so we also show in that piece mathematically, if you incorrectly use that as an instrument, it'll boost your findings to quote unquote find that money matters just from that one decision to use that variable in a different way. So that's why, Jay Green, Max Eden, and myself have all just pointed out that these studies don't seem to be any better than the mere correlational studies, and they may actually be worse if you're using invalid instrumental variables like the state share of education spending.
Between us, we've made 2 points. One is these studies aren't consistent with the real world evidence. And second, these studies, like you were getting into, might have little technical problems.
And Josh McGee also responded to the study that Max Eden and I responded to about the school spending cuts after the Great Recession. Josh McGee and his co-author Goldstein, I believe her name is her last name, at the University of Arkansas, tried to rerun the models in this study, and they found that if you just change the models by a little bit, that they actually found in a lot of cases that it didn't find any effects on outcomes. Whereas in the paper that was actually published, and it just so happened they chose the model that would kind of show that the funding mattered, the changes in funding mattered for student outcomes. And that doesn't mean that the authors of the original report had bad intentions. It could have just been that, it just turned out that they came up with a model that showed that money matters and they just didn't know to run it the other ways. But Josh McGee and I think her last name is Goldstein reran and replicated the study, but they couldn't. For so many of the models, they just found they're like, well, we're using the same data and the results are statistically insignificant.
So you brought something up, Corey, that money is used in different ways, and I'm going to use this to move us to the next piece of the conversation here with Prop 208. Again, not unique. This happens all over the country. But here's our example. Prop 208 does more than just, because it gets specific in a couple of ways of how the money needs to be used. So Ben, Prop 208 does what beyond just throwing cash at K-12 education? What specifics does it get into, and what's your take on the effectiveness of the proposals that are put forward there?
This is kind of interesting from a state level policy standpoint. Progressive groups in a lot of states for many years have been advocating for these state level taxes on the rich, and they typically get voted down. But what Arizona did that I think was bad policy, but turned out to be politically brilliant, was they said, we're going to raise tax on the rich, and then we're going to use it for these very specific things that sound like, sugar plum fairies, right? And they're really trying to get at improving teacher retention and improving teacher recruitment. So specifically, this money must be spent on salary increases for teachers and classroom support personnel, so salary increases for them, a mentoring program for new teachers, and something called the Arizona Teachers Academy. And so people love teachers. They should, they're doing God's work, right? They're dealing with a bunch of children all day long, right? Teachers
they're the real heroes.
Yeah, teachers are fantastic. And so it was smart to tie this to teachers. And yes, we want to recruit great teachers and we want to retain great teachers. I've actually written a lot on teacher labor markets over the years. And let me talk first about teacher retention. There's this old statistic, and studies actually have found this, that 50% of teachers leave after 5 years or 50% leave after 6 years. Actually, that's never been true because those studies have two big flaws. And I did a study on this. It's a 10-year-old study for Georgia. The two flaws in all those studies are, one, if a teacher moves into administration or a support role, they count them as gone, right? But they're still in the public education system. They just moved into a different job. Second is they ignore what I call comebacks, right? Teachers nationwide are around 80% women, and most new teachers are younger women. I don't know if this might be news. I think I'm breaking news right now. Some younger women like to have children. It's news, right? Some women
I've heard it. I've heard that happens, actually. I've heard that.
I'm breaking news now. So what happens is you get a teacher. She gets her first job at 22. She teaches a couple years and maybe, has a child, is gone for a semester or part of a semester. She gets counted as a goner, but then the next year she's back. And so my study in Georgia, I found that if you count for teachers who are still in the public education system, and if you count for these comebacks, after 5 years, 75% of brand new teachers in Georgia were still in the public education system. 75% after 5 years. After 10 years, it was 63% were still there. But again, some teachers might have had that child 10 years later, so I'm counting them as gone. They might still be a comeback.
So is your model the blue line or the green line here?
The green line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So they're much more likely to stay than originally.
Yes.
So what you're saying is we have a teacher retention problem. They all leave. Look, 48% of of all the teachers that come in the state. No, it's not 48%. It's actually 63%.
At least in Georgia at that time, yes.
Yeah.
And so teaching is actually a very stable workforce. People that go to college, a lot of them know they want to be a teacher. They major in education, and then they get their degree, and they're a teacher for life. That is a very common, actually.
Which is a good thing because you want as many teachers, and certainly certified teachers. That's what you really want, is teachers with certifications.
Right. I mean, because that's certification equals quality.
Right.
Right, Ben?
Yeah, well, better student outcomes, higher student performance, all of that, right?
As long as the government says you're a good teacher, that means you're a good teacher, right, Ben?
Actually, I've written on this as well.
Oh, you have?
I have.
I want to see this.
I wrote a paper with J.J. Arias called "When Does Teacher Licensure Make Sense?" And what we showed is that mathematically, teacher licensure basically never makes sense. And what I mean by licensure is that's a regime where the government requires you to get a government license to be in that occupation. And so what public school systems should do is get rid of all licensing requirements. And they should allow the professionals that run public schools to hire whoever they think are going to be the best teachers. And one of you got at this a second ago. When I was teaching at my prior university, I got to know some students studying to be teachers, even though I teach in economics. And some of them were exceptional, including some babysitters. So I had a friend in a large school district that was high up, and I would say, you really should look at, hire who the best teachers are, but you should look at these folks. And his first question he always asked me was, do they have a heart for children? Do they have a heart for children? So there was this guy in this very well-run school district in Georgia, our largest school district. And his first question is, does that person have a heart for children? And then after that, if I said yes, then he was willing to say, okay, why do you think they're smart? Why do you think they'd be a good teacher? And he actually ended up hiring these people. But some people that have a heart for children don't have a traditional education. And the research on this is actually very clear. You run a bunch of, you have a bunch of teachers that are traditionally certified, went to a college education, or a bunch of teachers who are alternatively certified. People that have a content degree in college. Maybe they majored in math, or they majored in English or history, and then they track them once they're teaching in the public education system, and they look at which students have the higher value-added test score gains. And what you find in every study is either the traditional teachers are this much better on average than the alternative teachers, or the alternative teachers are this much better on average than the traditional teachers. But the average doesn't matter. What we care about is hiring the next teacher. The next teacher that comes through that door, I want to hire the best, the next group I want to interview, I want to hire the very best one. And so if you ban a whole group of teachers, then you're forcing the public education system to hire the worst traditionally certified teachers.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's just not true, based on study after study after study, that every traditionally certified teacher is better than every alternative teacher. In fact, most of the studies find that on average, the alternative teachers are slightly better. And so we should have billboards on the interstate. We should have radio, internet ads, TV ads that say, if you want to teach in Arizona, you want to teach in Massachusetts, you want to teach in Georgia, Texas, California, Washington State, pick a state. Go to this website, right? And we'll figure out if you have good content knowledge. And then maybe we'll give you a quick course in the summer about, how to manage a classroom. Mm-hmm. And then no school district has to hire you. But if they want to, they can, right? Yep. We did that in Georgia. And the other thing we did in Georgia, and this was actually when I was working in the governor's office, and I'm responsible for this. Guilty as charged. Is we made it easy to get into teaching, even if you don't have a teaching degree. Again, no one has to hire you. And we did reciprocity. So if you were certified to teach in any other state in the United States, you were automatically certified in Georgia. And those two pots of teachers are now the biggest two pots of new teachers in Georgia. The alternatively certified and teachers certified in other states.
Really? That's cool.
And so we don't have it. They always talk about the teacher shortage. That's really not true. But to the extent there is a shortage of teachers, what you need to do is have reciprocity, alternative certification. I remember when Governor Barnes first did the alternative certification. I got the question when I suggested it to him. It was like this big commission of 20 people, and he was there. His entire commission was against my idea of allowing alternative certification, except for him. And one of the skeptics asked me, well, Dr. Smart Guy, how many people out there are going to do this? I said, I have no idea, but it's going to be more than one. And so when they did it, first day, they got 13,000 phone calls of people that wanted to be teachers. Now, surely the vast majority were not going to be good teachers. But again, public schools are hiring these folks in Georgia. So Arizona does not need to spend money on an expensive mentoring program. Mentoring is expensive. And if you want to get silly, what they'll do is a teacher will leave teaching and become a mentor, and they'll count them as leaving the teaching profession, right? Mm-hmm. Right? Mentoring is very expensive. The track record is not good with it. The Arizona Teachers Academy, what they do is they take someone who's very likely going to be a teacher anyway and say, we'll waive your tuition and fees for that year if you promise to teach in Arizona public school for a year. There's great research. The first research out of New York State, a huge fraction of public school teachers teach within 50 or 75 or even 25 miles of where they went to high school. Teachers are homebodies, right? Not every teacher, not all of them, but on average, a large fraction teach nearby. So if you're getting a degree in Arizona, a teaching degree, it's extremely likely that you will teach in Arizona when you finish. That's what the evidence says. So this is totally not an evidence-based approach, right? They're spending money on things they don't need to spend on. Teacher attrition is not a problem. Teacher retention is not a problem. You do want to recruit better people in, but what a lot of states do is they ban alternative teachers. If they really care about teacher quality, they need to take that ban away and educate public school leaders on hire the best people. Doesn't matter what their credentials are. Hire who the best is. And then if they're not good, get rid of them.
And is it possible to spend the newly raised money through the bond initiative on other things that, you said you were going to spend it on this, but then you start spending it somewhere else?
Because breaking the law. They'd be breaking the law.
Breaking the law. I mean, I just tweeted about something. I was looking for it for a second. I couldn't find it. It was in a different state, not Arizona, but they said it was all going to go towards teacher salaries or whatnot. And then, a couple of years later, this was passed in 2018, and then they just found out this year that they were allocating the money towards counselors and librarians and support staff that most voters when they're going to the ballot box, it said, all the advertisements for it and stuff said it was going to go to teachers. And then it ended up, large portion of it ended up not going towards teachers. I guess they just weaseled their way out of it and said they're teachers too, but
and that happens all the time. Happens all the time. And they do it two different ways that I'm aware of. First, like you just said, Corey, they changed the definition of teacher. And they say, no, teacher, is anyone that supports the students. It could be support staff. It could be janitorial staff. It could be like anyone that is involved in K-12 education through the district school. They changed the definition. That's one. The other way that I've seen this done where they shuffle money into other places is they advertise that way. They say teachers, 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 but the actual language of the bond proposition or the bill, like in this case, the voter proposition, doesn't say teacher. It says it's much less specific. So they don't have to change the definition of anything because it was never defined that way. And
but when people are thinking about it at the ballot box, they just know this is this proposition. And I've seen all these advertisements in big bold letters, teachers only, pretty much.
That's right. Yep.
I mean, this gets at something else that I was going to ask Ben. I mean, Ben's kind of getting at this idea that it's not all about the money. You can't just throw more money at a problem and expect things to go differently if you don't change the incentives in the system. Then my question is, well, why do we keep throwing more money at the problem? Why do people keep continuously going to the ballot box to throw more money at the K-12 education problem? What's the issue there? Why is there a disconnect? Why do you think that might be? I mean, part of it we kind of hinted at, but there's probably other things.
The public school PR machine is one of the best of all time, right? They're good. Yeah, they've done an amazing job of convincing the American people that more money is good for American students. And Matthew made a very important point earlier that I want to follow up on. He said what happened in Arizona has national implications and lots of levels. And I'll give you one, right? Again, progressive groups have tried for many years to do these tax increases on the rich, and they tend to fail. Like we saw this one in Illinois went down, I believe, this time. But by tying it to education, it passed in Arizona in a purple state. So they're going to copy that after state after state, right? And it's going to lead to bad tax policy and bad education policy. So Matthew, what you said earlier is exactly right. This is not an Arizona story. This is a national story.
Yep. Well, we're coming up on an hour. We can. Are there any specific other pieces that we didn't hit, or any points we want to drive home?
Oh, I just saw one comment on the screen. Someone who said he had been a teacher he's taught at the university level, homeschooling level, yet I can't teach in a public high school because I don't have state certification. That's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
So if he taught in a university, I'm in a university, we only hire you if you're a content expert. So he clearly has the content. His wife trusted him to teach his own dang kids, right? Public schools should be allowed to hire him or not hire him if they want to. It should be their decision. It shouldn't be some state official's decision. It should be the school's decision. They should hire the best teachers they can get.
Here's one other comment. It came up earlier, and we didn't put it up, but maybe just address this real quick, Ben. Can taxpayers' money follow the child? ?
Okay, that varies constitutionally by every state. And now federal money, that would be a federal decision. I would actually be opposed to that because I think the federal money would come with too many strings and too much bureaucracy required. But state money, generally speaking, not pretty much, I think Michigan maybe not, but constitutionally in pretty much every other state legislatures could decide to have the state money follow the child. Mm-hmm. Local money, that depends on the state constitution. Like, for example, in Georgia, they cannot put local money in some kind of scholarship program. But in some states you can. So the Institute for Justice has a great thing on this, where about what is the Constitution say in each state, what's permissible on this. So Ms. Tucker should go look at Institute for Justice. They have on their website, it's pretty easy to find.
Yeah, I'm putting it into the notes. If people are watching, it should pop up in a second. The IJ 50 state map. I want to hit Michigan. I think even though they classify it as the Blaine Amendment, still not allowing for private school choice in Michigan. I want to push back on that because you only see the Blaine Amendment brought up when it comes to K-12 education funding following the student. They have state-funded pre-K programs in Michigan that can be used at private providers of pre-K. And the Blaine Amendment in Michigan specifically calls out elementary, secondary, and pre-elementary, which would include pre-K as well. Nobody's using the Blaine Amendment as a weapon to get rid of those state-funded pre-K programs, and it's because the power dynamics differ. With pre-K, we already have a high degree of choice, but with K-12, there's an institution that benefits from getting your money regardless of how well they meet your needs. So they'll use everything they can to try to prevent families from switching, including trying to use the Blaine Amendment. But it's interesting that we still have Michigan's at least two, I think, state-funded pre-K programs in the state that
but
nobody says a word about that.
But I think there's no concern in every other state.
Yeah, every other state's fine.
If Tucker lives in another state, I think the state can do it, and maybe even local money. I'm not sure.
She asked a Florida question earlier. So Florida does have private school choice programs where money follows the student. And IJ has some good info on that. There are some other Ed Choice has some great info on programs in Florida. Step Up for Students. There are, good resources out there for Florida in particular. Cool. Well, anything else? Any other last issues we want to drive home? Ideas, thoughts, resources?
You two are the best two interviewers in podcasting on the internet.
It's pretty serious.
It's true. It's true. No one's better than you two. And again, I just think Matthew really honed in on this. What happened in Arizona is a national issue, and it's coming to your state. And I think it's bad tax policy and it's bad education policy. We should, what Ms. Tucker said earlier, right, in her thing, we should look to Arizona, what they did to have the tremendous gains they had, even though they had the big migration from overseas with kids whose English wasn't their first language. We need to copy with what brung them, dance with what brung them. And what brung them was tons of private school choice, charter schools, interdistrict choice. and they did it in a very low cost way to taxpayers. There's taxpayer funding needs to go to other valuable services too, not just K-12 education, right? And Arizona's
well, and especially when you've identified, or you've at least called into serious question, the idea that money drives student performance. When that's in question to the degree that it is, we shouldn't be, what is it, like 80%, 78% increase on the top tax bracket in the state? It's huge. It's a giant jump. So, that's awesome.
Matthew, do you know what percent of the state budget goes to education in Arizona? I know nationally it's like a third of state and local budgets go towards K-12 education. Yeah,
K-12. Well, in some states it's approaching half. Here in Arizona, I don't know that. I should know that.
It's still a good chunk. I mean, a lot of people say, "Oh, look, we're spending so much on police," but even if you look at the Urban Institute report on this nationally, the state spent about a third on K-12 education, but then on policing, it was only about 3%. So a lot of people will compare national defense too. And I think we spend more on education in the U.S. As far as total dollars. I think it's like $740 billion compared to the national defense budget.
Mm-hmm. It's huge. It's a huge amount of money. For as much evidence as is out there showing, or at least indicating, that there is no connection between, or at least there's a point of diminishing returns, right? I don't know where that is. I don't know that anyone does, but we're past it.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add,
reached that point.
I just want to add too that it's possible for money to matter, but I don't think that's the right question, right? I think the more important question is, where does money matter the most, and where can we get the most bang for our buck? And I think the logical answer there is in the types of schools that have an incentive to spend that money wisely. And so if we just attach the money to the student and let them pick, they'll choose the best option for their families, will choose the best option for their children. And just looking at the school choice evidence really brings that to light, that you look at places like DC, the DC voucher experiment, the latest one from 2019, found no effects on math reading test scores, but they found that at a third of the cost. A third of the cost. DC public schools get about $31,000 per child per year. The DC voucher students only got about $10,000 per child per year. And they also found large positive effects on reports of safety, satisfaction, and attendance. So that's another thing. We need to think about education being more than just effects on standardized test scores, because as Ben has written in other reports, I think in 2013 and otherwise, that families, when you ask them what they care about when they choose schools, it's much more than just standardized test scores, and standardized test scores tend to be towards the bottom of the list.
Well, and it would mean something different too if you said we want more K-12 education funding, and that funding actually made it what we call into the classroom, right? But it doesn't. It doesn't make it into the classroom. So it's like, but see, people don't know that. Voters don't know. When they go to the ballot box, they're just saying, well, I want kids to get a better education. And that's,
it's rational. It's rational not to put too much effort into this. I mean,
yeah.
Ben,
anyway,
any last minute? I know I kind of took over on last minute thoughts, but
no,
anything else?
No, I think this is great. I really enjoy you guys, and thank you for having me. It's been fantastic. And EFI, keep doing the great work.
Cool. Thanks you so much, Ben. Thanks to my co-host, Matthew Nielsen. Thank you, everyone, for watching and tagging along with the comments. This was yet another episode of the Educational Freedom Institute In Conversation podcast. Again, we're super happy that Ben Scafidi, professor of economics at Kennesaw State University, an advisory board member at Educational Freedom Institute, and also a Friedman Fellow at EdChoice. We're happy to have him again, and we'll be happy to have you on another future episode of the Educational Freedom Institute podcast. Thanks, Ben, and thanks everybody for watching.